I was standing at my living room window in Duluth, Minnesota, watching the snow pile up on my driveway when I saw the HOA president marching toward my house with a piece of paper clutched in her fist like a weapon. It was January, and we had just gotten slammed with 18 inches of fresh powder overnight. The city was a winter wonderland, but my driveway was about to become a battleground. My name is Vincent Lawson, and I had moved into this neighborhood called Pinewood Estates about 6 months earlier. The house was a beautiful 3-bedroom colonial that my late grandfather had owned for decades before leaving it to me in his will. I had grown up visiting this place every summer, and when he passed, I decided to leave my cramped apartment in Minneapolis and make this my permanent home. The woman storming up my unshoveled walkway was Patricia Henderson, a 52-year-old real estate agent who had appointed herself as the neighborhood's moral guardian. She had bottle blonde hair styled in that speak-to-the-manager cut, designer sunglasses perched on her head despite the overcast sky, and a permanent expression that suggested she had just bitten into a lemon. I opened the door before she could ring the bell. The cold air rushed in, and I could see her breath coming out in angry little puffs. "Mr. Lawson, this is unacceptable," Patricia announced, not bothering with pleasantries. She thrust the paper toward me. "You are in direct violation of the HOA bylaws. Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that all driveways and walkways must be cleared of snow within 12 hours of snowfall cessation." I took the paper and glanced at it. It was a formal notice of violation, complete with threats of fines starting at $200 and escalating daily. "Patricia, the snow just stopped falling an hour ago. I was about to go out and clear it." "That's Mrs. Henderson to you," she snapped, "and I'm not finished. We've had multiple complaints from other residents about your property maintenance." I raised an eyebrow. "Complaints? I keep my lawn mowed in the summer, my garbage cans aren't visible from the street, and I don't have any tacky decorations. What complaints?" She pursed her lips. "Your Christmas lights stayed up until January 2nd. The bylaws clearly state all holiday decorations must be removed by December 31st. It was 2 days, Patricia. Mrs. Henderson." Her voice had risen to a shrill pitch. "And it's the principle of the matter. When you moved in here, you agreed to abide by our community standards. We've worked very hard to maintain property values in Pinewood Estates." I felt my jaw tightening. "Look, I'll clear the driveway this afternoon. Is there anything else?" She pulled out another document from her designer purse. "Actually, yes. The HOA board has implemented a new policy. Effective immediately, all snow removal must be done by our approved contractor, Northwoods Landscaping. They'll be servicing all properties in the neighborhood, and the cost will be added to your monthly HOA dues." "What?" "That's ridiculous. I have my own snowblower." "It's not up for discussion. The board voted on it last week. We need uniformity in our snow removal to maintain the aesthetic quality of the neighborhood. Your snowblower is loud and unsightly, and frankly, the way you cleared your driveway last month left uneven patches that were embarrassing to look at." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my temper in check. "How much is this going to cost?" "An additional $150 per month during winter months, plus a $50 fee for emergency removals during major storms." "That's insane. I can do it myself for free." Patricia's expression hardened. "The policy is mandatory. If you refuse to comply, you'll be fined $500 for the first offense, $1,000 for the second, and we'll place a lien on your property for continued violations. Your grandfather may have lived here for years, but things have changed. We have standards now." She turned on her heel and marched back down my walkway, nearly slipping on a patch of ice. I caught her arm to steady her, but she jerked away as if I had burned her. After she left, I stood in my doorway, staring at the violation notice. Something about this whole situation felt wrong. My grandfather had never mentioned anything about an HOA. He had always talked about how peaceful the neighborhood was, how everyone minded their own business. I remembered him telling me stories about clearing his own driveway well into his 80s, proud that he could still do it himself. I went to my home office and started digging through the filing cabinet where I had stored all the documents related to the house. There were decades of property tax records, utility bills, and maintenance receipts, but nothing about an HOA. I found the deed that had been transferred to me after my grandfather's death and started reading through it carefully. The property had been purchased in 1987, and the deed was straightforward. There were no covenants, conditions, or restrictions mentioned anywhere. No references to a homeowner's association, no recorded easements, nothing that would suggest my property was subject to HOA control. I called my lawyer, David Chen, who had helped me with the estate transfer. He was a sharp attorney in his 40s who had gone to law school with my older brother. "Vincent, good to hear from you. How's the house?" "It's been interesting, David. I've got an HOA problem." I explained the situation, and I could hear him typing on his computer as I talked. "Wait, hold on," he interrupted. "When I did the title search on your property during the estate transfer, there was no HOA. Are you sure this is legitimate?" The woman who came to my door seemed pretty convinced. "She's been sending me notices since I moved in." "Email me everything you've received from them, plus a copy of your deed. I'll do some research and get back to you." I spent the rest of the day clearing my driveway myself, using my grandfather's old snowblower that I had found in the garage. It worked perfectly, and I took satisfaction in every pass I made through the snow. If Patricia thought I was going to roll over and let some made-up HOA dictate how I maintained my own property, she had another thing coming. That evening I got a call from David. "Vincent, this is very interesting. I pulled the records for your subdivision. Pinewood Estates was developed in 3 phases. The first phase, which includes your property and about 20 other homes, was built in the mid-1980s. There was never an HOA established for that phase. The second and third phases were developed in the early 2000s, and those do have HOA restrictions in their deeds. So, what does that mean? It means your property isn't subject to their HOA. They have no legal authority over you whatsoever. The problem is, it seems like they've been pretending they do, and they've probably been collecting fees from you illegally." I thought back over the past 6 months. They have been charging me HOA dues, $75 a month. I just assumed it was legitimate because everyone else in the neighborhood seemed to be paying. "How much have you paid so far?" "About $450. David was quiet for a moment. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to draft a letter explaining that your property is not subject to their HOA and demanding a refund of all fees you've paid. I'm also going to include a cease and desist directing them to stop contacting you with threats and violations. If they don't comply, we can escalate this. What if they don't back down? Then we take them to court. But honestly, once they realize they have no legal standing, they'll probably fold. HOAs can be aggressive, but they usually know when they're beaten." 2 days later, Patricia showed up at my door again. This time, she had 2 other people with her. A balding man in his 60s who introduced himself as Gerald Hutchins, the HOA treasurer, and a younger woman in her 30s named Brenda Morrison, the secretary. "Mr. Lawson, we received your attorney's letter," Patricia said, her voice tight. "And we need to clarify some things." "Come in," I said, stepping aside. It's too cold to talk on the porch." They filed into my living room, and I noticed how their eyes swept over the space, cataloging everything. I had kept most of my grandfather's furniture, and the house had a comfortable, lived-in feel that I knew Patricia would find lacking. "First of all," Gerald began, settling himself onto my couch, "your attorney is mistaken. All properties in Pinewood Estates are subject to our HOA. It doesn't matter when they were built." I pulled out a folder I had prepared. "Actually, according to the St. Louis County Recorder's Office, the original 21 properties in Phase 1, including mine, have no HOA restrictions on their deeds. The HOA was established in 2003 for Phases 2 and 3. Patricia's face was turning red. "That's irrelevant. When your grandfather was alive, he participated in neighborhood activities. He paid his dues. You have any record of that?" "Because I've gone through his financial records going back 15 years, and there's not a single payment to an HOA. Brenda spoke up for the first time. "We have a list of all residents who pay dues." "Then show it to me." She pulled out her phone and scrolled through some documents. Her confidence seemed to waver. "Well, it's possible there was an administrative oversight." "An oversight," I repeated. "So you've been threatening me with fines and liens for not complying with an organization that I'm not actually part of and that my grandfather never paid dues to." Gerald cleared his throat. "Mr. Lawson, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. You clearly care about your property, and we could offer you a special rate to join the HOA voluntarily." "Why would I do that, community?" Patricia said firmly. "We provide valuable services. Snow removal, landscaping standards, neighborhood watch. These things maintain property values. My property value is just fine, thanks, and I can handle my own snow removal." Patricia stood up abruptly. "Fine. If that's how you want to be, then we'll see you at the next board meeting. We're going to discuss this matter with the full board and our attorney." "You do that," I said, standing as well. "And when you talk to your attorney, make sure you show them my deed. I think you'll find they'll give you the same answer mine did." After they left, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and unease. I had won this round, but something told me Patricia wasn't the type to give up easily. Over the next few weeks, things escalated. I started receiving daily emails from the HOA, each one more aggressive than the last. They claimed I was devaluing the neighborhood, that my refusal to participate was selfish and un-American, that I was setting a dangerous precedent. The emails were CC'd to every address on their mailing list, which meant my neighbors were seeing all of this. I started getting dirty looks when I checked my mail. Mrs. Chen from next door, who had always been friendly, suddenly seemed too busy to wave. The teenager across the street, who used to shovel my walkway for extra cash, stopped coming by. Then the real harassment began. One morning in early February, I woke up to find my driveway had been plowed during the night, but the plow had pushed all the snow into a massive wall across my driveway entrance. It was at least 4 feet high and packed solid. It took me 3 hours to clear it. The next week, I received a citation from the city for having my garbage cans visible from the street. I had put them out the night before pickup, just like I always did, but apparently someone had called in a complaint. The fine was $150. Then my car got towed. I had parked it on the street overnight because I was having some work done in my garage, and when I went out in the morning, it was gone. The towing company said they had received a report of an abandoned vehicle. It cost me $400 to get it back, plus a day off work. I called David after the towing incident. "This is harassment. They're trying to make my life miserable until I give in." "Document everything," he advised. Keep records of every incident, every email, every interaction. If this continues, we can file for a restraining order and possibly sue for harassment. I don't want to sue. I just want them to leave me alone. I know, but you might not have a choice. These people sound unhinged. The breaking point came in late February. We had gotten another major snowstorm, nearly 2 feet this time. I had cleared my driveway and walkway by early afternoon, piling the snow along the edges of my property. I was exhausted but satisfied with my work. That evening, I heard a truck outside. I looked out my window and saw a Northwoods landscaping truck in my driveway. 2 workers were using a large snowblower to clear snow that had already been cleared. I ran outside in my slippers and bathrobe. "What are you doing?" "I already cleared this." One of the workers, a young guy in his 20s, looked uncomfortable. "Sorry, man, we were told to service this address. It's on our list." "I didn't request this service. Who ordered it?" "The HOA." "Look, we're just doing our job. We get paid either way. Get off my property. Now." The other worker, an older man with a grizzled beard, shut off the snowblower. "Kid, you need to take this up with the HOA. We have a contract." "You have a contract with an organization that has no authority over my property. This is trespassing." They exchanged glances, then started packing up their equipment. As they were leaving, Patricia's silver Lexus pulled up. She got out, her face furious. "What do you think you're doing? These men have a job to do." "On someone else's property, Patricia, not mine. The board authorized this service for your property because you've consistently failed to maintain it to community standards. I maintain my property just fine, and for the last time, I'm not part of your HOA." She stepped closer to me, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You think you're special. You think you're better than everyone else here. Your grandfather was a stubborn old fool and you're just like him. This neighborhood has moved forward, and if you can't keep up, you should sell and leave." Something in me snapped. My grandfather built his life here. He was here before you and your little fiefdom showed up, and I'm not going anywhere. "We'll see about that," she said, getting back in her car. "The board meets tomorrow night, 7 o'clock at the community center. I suggest you attend." I watched her drive away, my heart pounding. I went back inside and called David. "I need you at this HOA meeting tomorrow night. This has gone far enough." "I'll be there, and Vincent, bring your deed. The original if you have it. It's time to end this." The community center was a modern building at the entrance to the subdivision, funded entirely by HOA dues from phases 2 and 3. I had never been inside before. David met me in the parking lot, carrying his briefcase. "You ready for this?" he asked. "As ready as I'll ever be." The meeting room was set up like a small courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. About 30 people were already seated, and I could feel their eyes on me as I walked in. The hostility in the room was palpable. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, flanked by Gerald and Brenda. There were 2 other board members I hadn't met, a middle-aged Asian woman named Susan Park and a younger black man named Marcus Thompson. Patricia banged a gavel on the table. "This meeting will come to order. We have a full agenda tonight, but first, we're going to address the issue of Mr. Vincent Lawson and his refusal to comply with community standards." She launched into a presentation that she had clearly prepared in advance, complete with photos projected onto a screen. There were pictures of my house from various angles, showing my driveway, my lawn, my garbage cans, even my Christmas lights from January. "As you can see," Patricia continued, "Mr. Lawson has shown a consistent disregard for our community's aesthetic standards. His snow removal is haphazard at best. His property maintenance is substandard, and he has repeatedly refused to cooperate with board directives. She clicked to another slide showing a comparison of my property versus my neighbor's. This is what we're trying to prevent. A gradual decline in property values caused by one individual's selfishness. I felt David's hand on my arm, keeping me seated. He had told me to let them talk first, to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Gerald spoke next, pulling out financial documents. The board has calculated that Mr. Lawson's non-compliance has cost the community approximately $7,000 in reduced property values based on comparative market analysis. We propose that he be held financially responsible for this loss. That got murmurs from the audience. I could see some people nodding in agreement. Susan Park added, "We've also discussed the possibility of forcing a sale of Mr. Lawson's property under the community's right of first refusal clause." David leaned over and whispered, "That's not even a real thing in Minnesota HOA law. They're making stuff up." Finally, Patricia delivered what she clearly thought was the killing blow. "We have drafted a special assessment for Mr. Lawson's property in the amount of $15,000, covering back dues, fines, penalties, and community impact costs. This assessment is due within 30 days, or we will place a lien on his property and begin foreclosure proceedings." The room erupted in applause. People were actually clapping at the idea of taking my house. Patricia banged her gavel again. "Mr. Lawson, would you like to respond?" I stood up and David stood with me. "Yes, I would. But first, I'd like to introduce my attorney, David Chen." The smile on Patricia's face faltered slightly. David opened his briefcase and pulled out several documents. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I appreciate the opportunity to address the board. I'm going to make this very simple. My client's property is not subject to this HOA's authority. It never has been, and it never will be." He walked to the front of the room and handed copies of my deed to each board member. As you can see from the deed, Mr. Lawson's property was purchased in 1987, 16 years before this HOA was established. There are no covenants, conditions, or restrictions recorded on this property that would give your organization any legal authority over it. Patricia was scanning the document, her face growing paler. Gerald was whispering frantically to Brenda. "Furthermore," David continued, "I've done a title search on all properties in what you call Phase 1 of this subdivision. None of them, not a single one, has HOA restrictions on their deeds. You've been collecting dues from approximately 20 families who have no legal obligation to pay them." The murmuring in the audience had changed tone. People were looking confused now, uncertain. This HOA was established in 2003 for Phases 2 and 3 of the development. Those properties do have recorded HOA restrictions, but you have no authority to impose your rules on properties that predate your organization. What you've been doing is called extortion, and it's illegal. Marcus Thompson spoke up. "Is this true? Patricia, did you know about this?" Patricia's mouth was opening and closing like a fish. "We've always operated under the assumption that all properties in Pinewood Estates were part of the association." "Assumptions aren't enough," David said firmly. "My client has documentation showing that he has paid $450 in HOA dues since moving in. That money was collected under false pretenses, and we're demanding its immediate return. Additionally, the harassment my client has endured, the threatening letters, the false complaints to the city, the unauthorized snow removal on his property, all of this constitutes a pattern of harassment that could result in criminal charges." Susan Park was flipping through papers frantically. "Wait. If the Phase 1 properties aren't part of the HOA, that means we've been misrepresenting our membership numbers. We used those numbers to negotiate contracts with service providers. Gerald's face had gone from red to white. Oh God, the insurance. Our liability insurance is based on the number of properties we manage. If we're off by 20 properties, that's fraud. The room erupted in chaos. People were shouting questions at the board. Several residents were on their phones, presumably looking up their own deeds. Patricia was trying to bang her gavel, but nobody was paying attention. David let it go on for a minute, then raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, please, I have a proposal. My client wants to be left alone. He wants his money back, and he wants a written agreement that this HOA will never contact him again or attempt to enforce any rules on his property. If the board agrees to this right now, we'll walk away. If not, we file suit tomorrow morning, and I promise you discovery in that lawsuit will be very uncomfortable for everyone at that table. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but Gerald cut her off. We agree. We'll refund his money. All of it, David pressed. And the written agreement. Yes, fine, whatever. I want it in writing, tonight, before we leave this building. Brenda, who had been silent through most of this, pulled out her laptop and started typing. It took about 20 minutes to draft a simple agreement stating that I was not a member of the HOA, that I had no obligations to them, and that they would refund all money I had paid. It also included a mutual non-contact clause with penalties if either side violated it. I signed it. Patricia signed it with shaking hands. David made copies on the community center's printer, and we left. In the parking lot, I felt like I could finally breathe. Thank you, David. I couldn't have done this without you. Don't thank me yet. That was just the opening act. What do you mean? Vincent, did you hear what they said in there? They've been collecting dues from 20 families who aren't actually in the HOA. They've misrepresented their membership for insurance purposes. They've used those inflated numbers to negotiate contracts. This is fraud on a significant scale. So what happens now? Now those other families in Phase 1 are going to realize they've been scammed. Some of them have probably been paying dues for 20 years. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent collections. This HOA is going to get sued into oblivion. We were right. Within a week, I got calls from 4 of my neighbors in the original phase. They had pulled their deeds and confirmed they had no HOA restrictions. They were furious. Within 2 weeks, a class action lawsuit had been filed against the Pinewood Estates HOA by 17 families. David wasn't representing them, but he connected them with a friend of his who specialized in HOA disputes, a fierce attorney named Margaret Wu. She was in her 50s, barely 5 feet tall and absolutely ruthless in court. The lawsuit alleged fraud, unjust enrichment, harassment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The damages sought were in excess of $300,000, plus attorney's fees. The HOA tried to fight it at first. They hired a law firm from Minneapolis that charged $500 an hour. But as discovery proceeded, the case got worse and worse for them. It turned out that Patricia had known for at least 3 years that the Phase 1 properties weren't actually in the HOA. One of the former board members came forward with emails showing that Patricia had been advised by their previous attorney to stop collecting dues from those properties. But she had ignored the advice. She had been afraid that losing those 20 families would reduce the HOA's operating budget and force cuts to services. Even worse, some of the money collected from Phase 1 had been used for improvements that only benefited Phases 2 and 3. The community center where we had the meeting, the pool that was installed 5 years ago, the playground, all of it had been partially funded by people who weren't even in the HOA and wouldn't benefit from the facilities. Gerald, the treasurer, turned whistleblower when he realized he could be held personally liable. He provided financial records showing exactly how much had been collected from Phase 1 properties over the years, nearly $480,000. The criminal investigation started when Margaret Wu filed a complaint with the St. Louis County Attorney's Office. The prosecutor assigned to the case was a woman named Rachel Foster, who apparently had her own history with HOA abuse and was eager to pursue the case. I was interviewed by an investigator from the county attorney's office in March. He was a patient man named Officer Tom Bradford, who asked detailed questions about every interaction I had had with the HOA. "Walk me through the snow removal ban again," he said, taking notes. Patricia Henderson told me that I was required to use their approved contractor. When I refused and cleared my own driveway, she threatened me with fines and a lien on my property. Then the contractor showed up anyway and started working on my property without permission. "Did you tell them to leave?" "Yes, immediately, but Patricia showed up and tried to force them to continue working." "That's trespassing and potentially criminal trespass if they were trying to force you to pay for services you didn't request." Over the next few months, the investigation expanded. It turned out that Patricia had also been using HOA funds for personal expenses. She had charged several $1,000s worth of meals and shopping trips to the HOA credit card, claiming they were business expenses. She had also paid her own son's landscaping company for work that was never done. In June, criminal charges were filed against Patricia Henderson. The charges included theft by fraud, embezzlement, and criminal trespass. Gerald Hutchins was charged as an accessory for failing to report the fraudulent collections despite knowing about them. The trial was set for September. Margaret Wu had negotiated a settlement for the civil case. The HOA would pay $350,000 to the Phase 1 families, plus attorney's fees. The money would come from the HOA's insurance policy and a special assessment on the Phase 2 and 3 properties. When the residents of Phases 2 and 3 found out they were going to be hit with a massive assessment because of Patricia's fraud, they were livid. An emergency election was held, and the entire board was removed. Patricia, Gerald, and Brenda all resigned. Susan Park and Marcus Thompson were voted out. A new board was elected with a mandate to completely restructure the organization. They brought in a professional management company and implemented strict financial controls. They also formally acknowledged in writing that Phase 1 properties were not part of the HOA and returned all money that had been collected from those families. The criminal trial was held in early September at the St. Louis County Courthouse in Duluth. I was called as a witness for the prosecution. Taking the stand was nerve-wracking, but Rachel Foster walked me through my testimony carefully. Patricia's defense attorney tried to paint me as a troublemaker who had stirred up problems where none existed. But when Rachel introduced my deed as evidence and showed that Patricia had been explicitly advised by legal counsel to stop collecting from Phase 1 properties, the defense fell apart. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Patricia was found guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 18 months in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 months, plus 5 years of probation and full restitution. Gerald got 6 months in jail and 3 years of probation for his role in the cover-up. Watching Patricia be led away in handcuffs should have felt satisfying, but mostly I just felt tired. This whole thing had consumed nearly a year of my life. I had spent thousands of dollars on legal fees, even though I eventually recovered most of it. I had been harassed, threatened, and ostracized by people I had hoped would be good neighbors. After the trial, things slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board reached out to me with an apology and an offer of free snow removal for a year as a gesture of goodwill. I politely declined the snow removal, but accepted the apology. Some of my neighbors from Phase 1 organized a dinner to celebrate the end of the ordeal. We met at a local restaurant called the Harbor House, which had great views of Lake Superior. There were about 15 of us, representing most of the families who had been fraudulently included in the HOA. Mrs. Chen from next door came up to me with tears in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Vincent. I was horrible to you. Patricia told us you were trying to avoid paying your fair share, and I believed her." "It's okay," I said and meant it. She was very convincing. An older couple, the Johnsons, who had lived in the neighborhood since the beginning, raised their glasses. To Vincent, for having the courage to stand up when the rest of us just went along. We toasted, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. Mr. Johnson continued, "Your grandfather would be proud of you, son. He never liked it when Patricia started throwing her weight around. He and I used to talk about it, but he was old and he figured it wasn't worth the fight. You showed us all that sometimes the fight is worth it." That hit me hard. I had been thinking about my grandfather a lot during this whole ordeal, wishing I could ask his advice. Learning that he had faced the same battles, but felt too tired to fight them, made me sad, but also grateful that I had been able to finish what he might have started. The following spring, I was working in my yard, planting flowers in the garden my grandmother had started decades ago, when a moving truck pulled up at Patricia's house. Her husband, a quiet man named Robert who had always seemed embarrassed by his wife's behavior, was supervising the movers. After Patricia's conviction, he had filed for divorce and put the house on the market. I walked over, not sure what to say. Robert saw me coming and waved me over. "Vincent, I owe you an apology." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. I knew Patricia was out of control. I knew she was obsessed with this HOA thing, but I didn't stop her. I told myself it was just her hobby, that she needed something to focus on after the kids moved out. I should have seen what she was becoming." He looked exhausted, older than his years. "The things she did to you and the others, that's on her. But my silence, my enabling, that's on me. I'm sorry." We shook hands, and I helped him carry a few boxes to the truck. Sometimes redemption comes in small gestures. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 kids. I watched them move in on a warm Saturday in May. The husband came over to introduce himself. "Hi, I'm Ryan. That's my wife, Jessica, and our kids, Emma and Noah, Vincent Lawson. Welcome to the neighborhood." "Thanks. Hey, I heard there was some drama with the HOA a while back." "Should we be worried?" I laughed. "No, you're good. Just make sure you check your deed. If you're in Phase 1 like me, you're free and clear. If you're in 2 or 3, well, the new board is actually pretty reasonable." "Good to know." Emma's already excited about the pool. Watching his kids run around the yard, I felt something settle inside me. This was what neighborhoods were supposed to be about. Families living their lives, kids playing, people helping each other out. Not petty tyrants enforcing arbitrary rules and threatening anyone who questioned their authority. The final piece of closure came in August, almost exactly a year after Patricia had first shown up at my door with her violation notice. I received a letter from the St. Louis County Attorney's Office informing me that the restitution from Patricia's conviction had been processed, and I would be receiving a check for $450, plus interest. It was a small amount in the grand scheme of things, but it mattered. It was an official acknowledgement that I had been wronged, and that the system, however slowly, had made it right. I framed the letter and hung it in my home office, next to a photo of my grandfather standing in front of this same house in the 1990s. He was holding a shovel, having just cleared the driveway after a snowstorm, grinning at the camera with that stubborn pride I remembered so well. That winter was particularly harsh. We got storm after storm, and I was out there clearing my driveway every time, using his old snowblower. My neighbors would wave as they drove by, and sometimes the teenagers from down the street would help me finish up in exchange for hot chocolate and cookies. One particularly brutal morning in February, after we had gotten nearly 30 inches overnight, I was out at dawn, working my way through the massive drifts. My back was aching, my fingers were numb despite my gloves, and I was questioning my sanity for living in Minnesota. Ryan from next door came over with his own snowblower. "Mind if I help? I need to get mine warmed up anyway." We worked together, clearing both our driveways and then helping old Mrs. Peterson across the street with hers. By the time we finished, the sun was fully up and the neighborhood looked like a Christmas card, all white and pristine. "Coffee," Ryan offered. "Absolutely." We sat in his kitchen, warming our hands on mugs of coffee while Jessica made pancakes for the kids. "Can I ask you something?" Ryan said. "Was it worth it? The fight with the HOA?" I thought about it for a long moment. Yeah, it was. Not because I won, though that was nice, but because if I hadn't fought, Patricia would still be out there bullying people and stealing money. Sometimes you have to stand up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He nodded slowly. "My dad always said that evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Your dad was a smart man." The news of what happened in Pinewood Estates spread through the Duluth area, and even made some national HOA watchdog websites. I got contacted by a few reporters, and one story I did with a local paper got picked up by a national outlet. The headline read, "HOA dissolved after judge rules properties never subject to restrictions." It wasn't entirely accurate. The HOA wasn't technically dissolved, just restructured and reduced in scope, but it captured the spirit of what had happened. I started getting emails from people across the country who were dealing with their own HOA nightmares. I couldn't help them all, but I referred them to David and Margaret Wu, and I shared my story whenever I could. One email particularly stuck with me. It was from a woman in Florida whose HOA was threatening to foreclose on her home because her flowers were the wrong shade of pink. She was elderly, living on a fixed income and terrified of losing everything. I called her directly. "Listen, Mrs. Garcia, the first thing you need to do is pull your deed. Look for any recorded restrictions. If they're not on your deed, the HOA might not have any power over you." She was crying. "I don't know how to do that. I'll help you. Give me your property address." I spent 2 hours on the phone with her, walking her through how to access county records online, how to read her deed, how to document everything the HOA was doing. In the end, her situation was different from mine. Her property did have HOA restrictions, but I connected her with a legal aid organization in her area that took on her case pro bono. 6 months later, she emailed me to say her case had been settled. The HOA had dropped all charges and even paid her attorney's fees. She sent me a picture of her garden, full of pink flowers in every shade imaginable. These little victories reminded me why the fight had mattered. It wasn't just about my driveway or my property rights. It was about standing up to bullies, about refusing to let petty tyrants control people's lives, about remembering that we're all human beings trying to live in peace. The second winter after the trial was easier. I had refined my snow removal technique. I had good neighbors who helped each other out, and I could clear my driveway without worrying about some HOA bureaucrat showing up to measure whether my snow piles were regulation height. On the anniversary of Patricia's conviction, I got a letter from her. It had been forwarded from the county attorney's office, as she wasn't allowed to contact me directly under the terms of her probation. The letter was short: "Mr. Lawson, I am writing to apologize for my actions. I let power and pride consume me, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. You didn't deserve the treatment you received. I hope you can find peace in your home. Patricia Henderson." I showed the letter to David when he came over for dinner that week. "What do you think? Is it genuine?" He shrugged. "Does it matter? You've moved on. Whether she has or hasn't doesn't change anything for you." He was right, but I wrote back anyway, a short note saying I accepted her apology and wished her well. Not because I felt I owed it to her, but because I owed it to myself to let go of any remaining anger. Life continued its normal rhythm. I got a promotion at work. I dated a woman named Jennifer Sullivan for a while before we mutually decided we were better as friends, and I slowly made the house truly mine while still honoring my grandfather's memory. The garden became my pride and joy. Every spring, I would plant new flowers, expanding the beds my grandmother had started. Mrs. Chen taught me how to grow tomatoes, and Ryan and I built raised beds in our backyards together, sharing the work and later the harvest. The neighborhood itself changed too. The new HOA board focused on actual community building rather than rule enforcement. They organized block parties, movie nights in the park, and a community garden. The pool that had been built with stolen money from Phase 1 families was open to everyone in the neighborhood, not just HOA members, as a gesture of reconciliation. I went to one of the pool parties that summer, bringing a potato salad, my mother's recipe. Kids were splashing in the water, parents were grilling burgers, and people were actually talking to each other instead of judging each other's lawn maintenance. Marcus Thompson, one of the former board members who had been voted out, came up to me. "Hey, Vincent." I never got a chance to properly apologize. I was on that board and I should have questioned what Patricia was doing. I didn't, and that makes me complicit. "You didn't know," I said. "I should have asked more questions." I let her run everything because she seemed so confident, so sure of herself. I learned a hard lesson about the danger of deferring to authority without verifying the facts. We talked for a while, and I learned that Marcus was a teacher at the local high school. He taught civics, and he had started using the Pinewood Estates case as an example in his classes about the importance of checks and balances, even in small community organizations. "My students eat it up," he said. "It's real. It happened right here, and it shows them why we can't just assume people in power are acting legally or ethically." That made me smile. If some good came out of all this chaos, if kids learned to question authority and demand accountability, then maybe it had been worth even more than I thought. As autumn arrived and the leaves turned brilliant shades of red and gold, I found myself sitting on my front porch one evening, a beer in hand, watching the sun set over the neighborhood. This house, this property, it represented something deeper than just ownership. It was a connection to my family's history, to my grandfather's stubborn independence, to the idea that a person's home should be their sanctuary, not a source of stress and conflict. The snow would come again soon. The cycle would repeat, winter after winter. But now when I cleared my driveway, it would be because I chose to, not because some HOA demanded it. That freedom, that simple autonomy, was worth every moment of the fight. A car pulled into the driveway next door and Ryan got out, waving. "Hey, Vincent, you see the weather forecast? Big storm coming this weekend." "Yeah, I saw. You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be. At least we can do it ourselves now, right?" "Right." He paused, then added, "You know, when we were house hunting, our realtor warned us about HOAs, said they could be a nightmare." We almost passed on this neighborhood because of it. What changed your mind? I looked up the court case, saw what you did. Figured if things went south again, at least we'd have an example to follow. Plus, the new board seems solid. It was a small comment, but it meant the world to me. The fight hadn't just been about my property. It had been about setting a precedent, about showing others that you could stand up to institutional bullying and win. That weekend, the storm arrived as predicted. 26 inches of heavy, wet snow. I was out early with my snowblower, working methodically through the driveway. The machine chugged along reliably, just as it had for my grandfather all those years. Halfway through, I took a break, leaning on my shovel and looking at the house. Smoke was curling from the chimney where I had left a fire burning. The windows glowed warm in the early morning light. Snow covered everything in a pristine blanket, and for a moment, the world was perfectly still and quiet. This was home. Not because of property values or community standards or HOA regulations, but because it was mine, truly mine in the deepest sense of the word. I had fought for it, defended it, and won the right to live here on my own terms. I finished clearing the driveway, then helped Ryan with his, then Mrs. Peterson with hers. By noon, our little section of the street was clear and several of us gathered in Ryan's driveway, admiring our work. "Same time next storm," Ryan joked. "Wouldn't miss it," I replied. As winter deepened, I received one final piece of news related to the case. The Minnesota State Legislature had passed a new law, informally called the Pinewood Estates Act, which required HOAs to verify the legal status of all properties they claimed authority over and to provide annual disclosure statements to members. The law also increased penalties for HOA fraud and created an easier process for homeowners to challenge HOA authority. David called me when the law passed. "You did this, you know. Your case was cited in the legislative history. You changed things for thousands of homeowners across the state." I didn't know what to say. I had just been trying to protect my own home, to honor my grandfather's legacy. The idea that it had led to systemic change was overwhelming. "Vincent, you still there?" "Yeah, sorry, it's just a lot to process. You should be proud." Real change usually starts with one person refusing to accept injustice. That was you. After we hung up, I sat in my grandfather's old chair, the one I had kept in the living room, and thought about legacy. My grandfather had left me this house, but more than that, he had left me an example of integrity and independence. He had lived his life on his own terms, and he had given me the foundation to do the same. The story could have ended there, with the laws changed and justice served. But life isn't about endings, it's about continuations. The real victory wasn't in the courtroom or in the new legislation. It was in the everyday act of living freely, of making choices about my own property without fear or intimidation. Spring came again, as it always does in Minnesota, sudden and glorious after the long winter. I planted my garden, expanding it even further. I painted the shutters a deep blue that I liked, without worrying whether it met anyone's aesthetic standards. I put up a small greenhouse in the backyard for starting seedlings. No one complained. No one threatened me with fines. No one showed up with violation notices. That's what freedom feels like, I realized. Not the dramatic moment of courtroom victory, but the quiet, peaceful act of living your life without someone else's arbitrary rules hanging over your head. One warm evening in May, I hosted a barbecue. Not an HOA-sanctioned event, just neighbors and friends gathering because we wanted to. We ate burgers and hot dogs. The kids played in the sprinkler, and someone brought a guitar and played music as the sun went down. Mrs. Chen brought her famous dumplings. The Johnsons told stories about the old days in the neighborhood. Ryan's kids taught my friend's kids how to catch fireflies. It was chaotic and loud and absolutely perfect. As I looked around at the gathering, I realized this was what my grandfather had loved about this place. Not the structure or the street layout or the property values, but the potential for community, real community, built on mutual respect and voluntary cooperation rather than forced compliance and fear. Later, after everyone had gone home and I was cleaning up the yard, I found myself standing in the same spot where Patricia had confronted me that cold January day nearly 2 years ago. So much had changed since then. The neighborhood had changed. I had changed. Even Patricia, in her own way, had been forced to change. But the most important thing was that the house was still here, still mine, still a sanctuary. The fight had been worth it. Every moment of stress, every dollar spent on lawyers, every sleepless night worrying about the outcome. It had all been worth it because I had defended something that mattered. I went inside, locked the door, and settled into my evening routine. Tomorrow I would go to work. Tomorrow I would come home to this house, to this neighborhood, to this life I had fought for and won. Tomorrow, and all the days after, I would live freely on my own property, answerable to no one but myself and the laws of the land. The deed sat in my safe, that precious document that had been the key to everything. Sometimes I would take it out and read it, reminding myself of what it represented. Not just legal ownership, but the fundamental American principle that a person's home is their castle, protected from arbitrary authority. As I sat in my living room that night, a glass of whiskey in hand, I raised a toast to my grandfather. "We did it," I said quietly to his photo on the mantel. "We protected your home. We stood our ground. I hope I made you proud." Outside, the street was quiet. Lights glowed in windows up and down the block. Families were settling in for the night, safe in their homes, free from tyranny both large and small. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary neighborhood, and that ordinariness was the greatest victory of all. The Pinewood Estates case became a footnote in Minnesota legal history, studied in law schools and referenced in property law textbooks. But for me, it was never about making history. It was about making a home, about honoring family, about standing up for what was right even when it would have been easier to give in. In the years that followed, I became something of an informal advisor to people facing HOA disputes. I never charged for my time, just passed on the lessons I had learned. Check your deed first. Document everything. Don't be afraid to get legal help. Stand firm on your rights, but be willing to compromise on reasonable things. And most importantly, remember that the people threatening you are just people too, often acting out of their own fears and insecurities. Some cases I heard about were resolved quickly. Others dragged on for years. But knowing that my story had helped others, that the law had been changed to protect homeowners, gave meaning to everything I had gone through. The house continued to be my sanctuary. I made improvements, always careful to maintain the character my grandparents had established. I refinished the hardwood floors, updated the kitchen while keeping the original cabinetry, and restored the old brick fireplace to its former glory. Every winter, I cleared my own snow. Every spring, I planted my own garden. Every decision about my property was mine to make, and that freedom never got old. Sometimes I would see Patricia around town. She served her time and moved to a small apartment on the other side of Duluth. We never spoke, but occasionally our eyes would meet across a grocery store aisle or in a parking lot. There was no anger there anymore, just a mutual acknowledgement of a chapter closed. The neighborhood thrived under the new HOA management. Property values actually increased after the corruption was exposed and eliminated. proving that fear-based rule enforcement had never been necessary for a successful community. People took pride in their homes because they wanted to, not because they were forced to. As I write this, 5 years after that first confrontation in my driveway, I can say with certainty that the fight was worth it. Not everyone has to become an HOA warrior. Not every battle needs to be fought. But when the issue is fundamental rights, when it's about protecting your home and your autonomy, sometimes you have to stand and fight. The deed is still in my safe. The house is still my castle. And every time it snows, I go out with my grandfather's old snowblower and clear my driveway myself, free and independent, exactly as it should be. That's the real ending, not the courtroom drama or the legal reforms, but the quiet satisfaction of living on your own terms in the home you love. That's the victory that lasts.